theme of the next rough hour is the view from Europe. How does the UK theatre landscape look to European playwrights? And perhaps following the title of the earlier panel, we might also rephrase this as, what's the problem with the UK? And my name is Boenisch. I'm Professor of European Theatre here at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. So let's just dip into things. I'm in the first round just asking each of the panelists one question about their work in relation to this topic, how you, from your view, what you do, perceive the European theatre landscape in relation to that searching translation issue. And Claudia, you're working with that cultural organization. You're also working with Fabulamundi, and I think it would be quite interesting for us to hear a little bit about the initiative and also the positive and perhaps negative or problems you encounter in that work of translating between playwriting cultures, between languages.
Yes. So thank you very much for inviting us, and I'm actually the project leader of a project which is called Fabulamundi, Playwright in Europe. It's a European funded project, has been funded 3 times by European Commission, 2 times as a small scale project, and now we are working as a large scale project. That means that we're working since 2017 and we'll end up our work in 2020. We're now working with 16 countries, different countries, and we're working with 120 European playwrights. So, of course, we are very much into this problem of translating and mediating among cultures, and what we have always been thinking of when we read the text of our playwrights is that more than being an international project, we are an interlocal project, because in fact, every text has its own singularity and takes its own image of the country, even if, as it was pointed out before, of course, we have many, many stereotypes in reading text and interpreting the text. Perceiving the UK theatre from our point of view has always been a very interesting dramaturgy. I would say the contemporary playwriting is UK. So from an Italian perspective, but also from a European perspective, of course, there is a lot of respect and modeling from the UK theatre. But as my experience, when we are projecting the application of a large-scale Fabulamundi, we were talking with some UK theatres, and the most difficult thing for them was to be able to guarantee us that they could have staged 10 playwrights from abroad. So we end up doing the application in 2017 without an English theatre in our panel of partners, because they weren't really able to guarantee that. They were very much interested into exporting playwrights into Europe, but they could not believe or trust their audiences in presenting that many, I mean, in 4 years, they're not so many, but they said there were many foreigners playwrights. I'm happy now to be here today because I'm actually testimony that this has been changing a little bit, because then we are now dealing with the Gate Theatre in London. Given the entrance of Ellie McDougall, we were able to talk to them and to actually welcome them into the Fabulamundi network. So the Gate Theatre will become one of the partners of Fabulamundi and will really promote at least 5 of foreigners playwrights. So I think in this 2 years' time from when we were writing the application and now, given to Brexit, given to different atmosphere or whatever it is, something has been changing among the curiosity of the theatre programmers more towards European playwrights.
That's an interesting thing also maybe to follow up later, why these things may now be changing and what the Brexit effect might be. Mm-hmm. But first let's maybe jump from Italy to Slovenia. Komljanec, the Royal Court has also in a way introduced you to London and the English playwriting scene and tradition, and you have stayed in the UK then and worked across both languages as well, but you also in a way, discussing with other Slovenian playwrights, of course, this look from the UK to the other countries, or not, the lack of the interest in maybe Slovenian playwrights. You get to say something about your own experience and those of your colleagues.
Yeah, so my experience as a playwright was when I came to do the residency at the Royal Court, I very much felt out of place. My writing, I felt that wasn't really, I didn't feel that it was being read for what I intended. But I was also very young as a playwright, so I didn't have the experience to kind of really confidently stand behind it. And only in retrospect, I kind of understood what I was being suggested to do with my play. Let's leave it at that. And then, then later I came to do an MA in playwriting in Exeter. And it was then when I started, when I realized that I had to reinvent myself as a playwright if I wanted to write in English. So it's almost like I'm two playwrights. When I write in English, I write very different kind of plays than what I write in Slovenian. And I have later tried to, brought my translated plays, the ones that I had staged in Slovenia, to some feedback groups, to potential directors, had chatted with them, and it was incredibly validating to hear the talk, that the paper that Noah gave about how that is lost in translation for because some things just do not translate. So some of the plays, even though they exist in English, the ones that I've written in Slovenian and they exist now in English, I don't see a point in pursuing them having staged in England, because they simply, I don't think they would speak to an audience here. I don't know, that's maybe not the final answer, but that's kind of my experience so far. In terms of other playwrights in Slovenia and what their experience was in being produced abroad and in the UK, very few have been produced in the UK. There is a sense of superiority of the British theatre, especially the London kind of theatre scene, and a sense of it being closed towards the foreign plays, which is something we've heard a lot of about today already. But funnily enough, playwrights in Slovenia who write in a kind of, you could say British style, are almost being looked down on. So, to say for an original play in Slovenia, oh, it's a bit of an English text, isn't it? Is actually, it's actually not a compliment. So that's funny, isn't it? Although we continue to put on a lot of British playwrights and a lot of new writing from England in translation. So there, I haven't really given you an answer, but
it opens up a lot of topics we can pursue later. Thanks very much. On to Germany, Ulrike, Syha has started as a dramaturge originally, and then for the best part of this century you've worked as a playwright, but also a translator, and thereby taking part in that maybe one-way street translating work from Martin Grimkel, Churchill and others, while also very successfully writing your own work. Drift was awarded the Heidelberger Stückenmark Prize in 2018.
Last year.
But you're also involved in the Eurodram exchange network that we already talked about a little bit at the beginning. What is your experience in that field of navigation between English drama coming into the European sphere and the other way around, with your own work or those of others, maybe with Eurodram?
Well, I think I need to, first of all, deconstruct some ideas about Germany. I hear that we do a lot of foreign drama on stages, which might be true in percentage, but it's only Western European drama. It doesn't include any Asian drama, any South African drama, any African drama. It's still impossible to sell that kind of work to the state-funded theatres in Germany. On the other hand, we always talk about the state-funded theatre, which is famous for being avant-garde and rich, having a lot of money, for being deconstructive itself, like deconstructing text, deconstructing story. But we do have a quite vivid scene of private theatres in Germany, and we tend to forget that, who still play a lot of well-made plays that are actually completely English style. And I would say, I'm kind of a dinosaur because I still write text. Most German playwrights would maybe say the time for text is over. We do other theatre projects now. So why do we still need translations? Question mark.
Well, maybe it's also coming back, that might be a question, which leads us on nicely to Sissi Liechtenstein, who after some work as dealing with media rights and adaptation rights into media, has set up her own agency, International Performing Rights, IPR, which deals exclusively with bringing into the UK international playwrights. So do you still find playwrights? Is the time over? Is it timely? And
I do. There are there are masses of playwrights, and you find them a lot, and not. I think you find them very easily in Germany, in France, in Scandinavia, where there is an agency system or publishing houses that, like here, where you know how to find them. Much harder in Italy, Slovenia, where you don't have that, but you still find them.
And with your work with the agency, with the partners here in the UK, with the theatres, with the programmers, how do you approach them? Do you find some of the problems we discussed earlier, the non-readiness to accept translation, are these problems?
I think there's a huge change, I noticed, so I started with the agency in 2012, and in that time there's been a huge change and more interest. But I think it's I think it's not the fear of the translation, it's the fear of it's unknown. It's an unknown writer that I present to my audience. How do I do that? But there is a huge openness that I found. And for me, when I started, I used to work for English agencies and used to represent English playwrights, and suddenly I thought, well, I'm going to come without an agency in the background with only foreign material. Nobody is actually going to meet me. And I noticed that wasn't at all. Everyone from, obviously, people like the Gate and the Royal Court who engage with international theatre, but everyone from regional theatres, commercial producers, the National Theatre, independent company, and a lot of young directors, they all want to see new material.
Let's follow up maybe some of the points that also already came up in some of your statements, and to a degree also in the earlier discussion. One big topic was the way that different stage languages maybe collide, different stage aesthetics maybe find a clash, and I was just wondering how, especially with the agency, with programs such as Eurodram and Fabulamundi, you negotiate these processes of stage languages, of everything that's going on in this process of translation behind the language that Noah was setting out in his opening statement already.
Well, yes, of course. I mean, we have seen, dealing with 200 texts in Fabulamundi, because actually each part in our country invites the foreigners' playwrights. So the choices are not, obliged. So a playwright can be chosen by 5 countries, or there's no limitation about that. So what we have realized that, of course, at an international level, it prevails normally the text which is more, let's say, readable, in a sense, which is a little bit more with a clear structure. for example, for some German texts, which are completely post-dramatic structures. So most of the texts we have from Germany, they have, let's say, variable number of characters. That means they can be staged by 3 actors or up to 30. So for some Italian theatres, for example, that is a very displacing idea. So, I mean, they really would need to get into the reading of the text and try to understand how to stage it. And that makes, another level of complexity. And so they tend to choose a simpler one, So I'm not saying that it's the most banal one, but the simpler one. So I think that the most circulating texts are the ones which are more readable in sense of structure, firstly. Because having a clear structure, and it's not that they have to be the well-done play, but at least they have to be a recognizable structure. This is something that I've noticed have made the success or less of the text. One thing that is very important for the Fabulamundi playwrights, and it's important for the playwrights, is that the internationality of a playwright, it's very important for the playwright himself. Because, for example, we had some cases of playwrights from Romania, for example, which couldn't get by living by writing for theatre at all. So they could, they were journalists, they were teaching, they were doing other things. And given the internationality that we were able to give them with Fabulamundi, now they actually have royalties from our country, which are mostly having a system, such as Germany, for example. So they can buy living only for writing. So I think the internationality of playwriting, it's really a way for establishing in some countries a playwright as a profession, because not in all countries it is a profession, even if you are a successful playwright. In England, if you are a successful playwright, you are completely working based on your work as a playwright, but in other countries this is impossible. So I think the internationality of that makes a lot of sense and can, go a step forward the playwright. I don't know, maybe I was out of the theme of the question, but.
Kim, you already said you're probably different, 2 playwrights in one writing for Slovenia, one writing for England. So is there something going on, and maybe also Ulrike, when you say you'll probably be a dinosaur looking at the ways you write text, is there something on that makes you think, oh, I need to write a structured text if I perhaps think, should this be staged somewhere else and not just in...
I don't know. I think inevitably as a writer, you probably somewhere, even if subconsciously, you're thinking about your audience. So you will be thinking, who am I speaking to when I'm writing this? And you will speak differently to different audiences. So in a way, just maybe to express another insult, as I've started well, is when I lived in England, I was very excited about the number of opportunities there are for writers and the nurturing culture for writers here, which is close to none, I think. But the theatre I find much more exciting on the continent. So there's a kind of paradox in that, because I'm a writer and I believe in the power of words and language, but at the same time, what excites me when I go to the theatre is it's not necessarily the text, and I think that is something that Ulrike also said, that this is the era where text is being questioned as a vital part of a theatre performance. I don't know, in Slovenia you've got two big strands of playwriting, one very post-dramatic one, a very collaborative with directors, not structured on the page, with no defined characters, and that exports, I think, better actually than structured sort of kind of almost traditional type of playwriting. So, yeah.
But then also in Germany we often have it that British playwrights are looked at as role models in a way. The whole 1990s generation now, Simon Stevens is probably, I think, the most performed English, at least living playwright.
I don't know.
And what is it that we coming from that post-dramatic tradition see in English plays? Do you negotiate between different stage aesthetics also when you work as a translator?
Well, definitely. I usually tell the short story that when I talk to our playwrights in New York, I basically tell them first thing that if you write there's a white couch on stage, please expect that there won't be a couch. Because we live in Germany, we live in a culture that is a director's theatre. It's not a playwright's theatre. Playwrights do not go to rehearsals. They do not go and see their own shows. It's very much disconnected from the playwright. So when I write a play as a playwright, I create material for a director. I do not expect them to follow my rules or something like that. And that's different when I translate, because I sometimes have to negotiate with a playwright coming from an English-speaking country that their say in what happens on stage might be limited or non-existent even, and that they might not recognize their own play. I think that has benefits and it has disadvantages both.
There was, of course, this famous essay by Claude, the French director, about translating, where he speaks about very positively the translation bringing out the subconscious of a text, augmenting the text, bringing in a third layer, and in a way sort of triangulating the otherwise very straightforward communication, which makes things more interesting. Is in the opposite than the other tradition where you think about structure? Does that close down in a way the communication, the possibility?
I think maybe the question is to do with audience, because when you're writing a play, you're basically writing for two audiences. One is the production company and the director, and then the next stage is the audience that's going to come and see the show. So perhaps that's where this translation happens, that maybe in Britain writers write more directly for the audience that comes to see the show, whereas in cultures which are very much director-led theatres, writers tend to write more for the director and the production team. Or maybe that's what we're going towards. I don't know.
And are these concerns in your work as well, selecting, translating in a way for those playwrights that you have?
I think it's what I think with all the director-led theatre in Germany and having playwright theatre here, for me that is actually a very interesting, or it enables, what I've found out, it enables me to give theatres here or producers to say, look at this play, it's a translation, the playwright is alive, he is happy to talk to you and your director to see what needs to be done to the play. So there is a bit of bringing that director-led theatre to here, which might allow a play that has been translated, and nobody said, like, there are like 40 characters, I can't deal with that. And we had yesterday a very interesting conversation when they were talking about the play that was written by Maria Milosevic and the director. They were talking, and she said, there are 30% of the play that you can cut. And then they were talking in the room and saying, change certain things, and I think that's, so yes, just the translation of a play is tricky when it comes out of director-led theatre, but there is a beautiful combination, I feel, that can be made by the theatre here that values the word. And I know that a lot of the playwrights I work with are completely like, oh my God, they're asking me if they can change the word. And they love that because it values them as a playwright. But I think at the same time, that is good. So it gives the chance to work with the playwright and the directors and the translators here to create what is valuing the word, but giving the opportunity to make it work in this country.
I think that possibly has to do with the fact that here the profession of a dramaturge is still not widely spread, whereas in continental Europe, most of, at least what I know, is you've got the dramaturge in the rehearsal room, and they are sort of speaking for the text. I'm not going to say the writer, because they don't necessarily speak for the writer, but they are there to make cuts, to make changes to the text. Whereas here, it's the writer who does that work, or is invited to do that work when changes are suggested. So I think maybe that's also, it has to do with that kind of.
But then that happens when you get a translated play. So a director here that a German play that she saw at the Gorky Theatre, she loved it. She said to me, I want to do this. This really speaks to audiences here. And I said, oh, yeah, sure. And I sent her the text and she read it and said, this has nothing to do with what I saw. I said, no, I know. And she said, but what do I do? And I said, just speak to the writer and see what they allow you to do. And I think that's the problem with heavily dramaturg work that then gets translated, because that's what is being put on stage. That is sent, and that might not actually be what was there. And for me, that's what I keep telling when I give directors, producers, theatres, plays, and say, look at this is the original play, but you may be able to talk to the playwright, ask him, why has he been doing this? Can this be changed? Then you include him in the work, but it might, because you might think, I like that play, but I don't want it to do with 40 characters, just with 4. And there might be an opportunity to do that.
I would like, I would like to add a positive aspect of doing foreign stuff in Germany, for example, because I also organize projects between different, let's say, for example, the USA and Germany. And we often found that the audience in Germany found it easier to kind of relate to a play that was kind of about them, but not about them, because it was not so much in their face. If you want to talk about sensitive subject and sensitive issues, also with the young audience, they found it much more interesting that the whole thing was in the United States and not taking place in Hamburg. But then they suddenly came up during our workshops and so on and said, yeah, but it's actually about me, although it's taking place in Chicago. And that made space for a lot of interesting discussions that I think wouldn't have been possible if it had been written in a kind of educational way, straight in the face. This is about you. You are a Muslim in Hamburg. Please answer to that issue. So, so I sometimes also see the benefit of that.
This triangulation idea.
Yeah, I would just to add something about the author involvement in the staging of a text. I mean, in Fabulamundi, we have actually a little bit forced this process, even if many of the authors coming from the continent, European countries, are not used to be present when there are the rehearsals. And we have just noticed that for them was really a kind of a learning process, a lot of a learning process about their text, because many of Italian, for example, playwrights which have been staged abroad, they just learned what was not necessary of that text just because they saw it in another language. And they haven't felt that when they've seen it in Italian and in the same language, it feels like everything was natural, was needed. But in another language, they suddenly saw what it was not necessary. And this was given like from the confront director with the team doing the work. And so even if there are some playwrights who are very shy about this because they're not used at all in being involved, I mean, we've just been pushing them to be involved, and we have had the most fruitful, results, because some of them have even changed the original test out of that, because they figured that it could be really improved by this confrontation with, a professional team or whatever. For years, because of course the author is always involved, but for all the countries which not, we are much more direct as theatres. It is something which is really remarkable in that sense. So.
Another aspect you just mentioned, that the director who wanted to do that German or whatever it was play saw it at a theatre. Then we have your two initiatives, Eurodrum and Fabulamundi, also in a way trying to facilitate encounters with playwrights where there's an opportunity to discover plays. How are those mechanisms working, also for you as an agent? Where do you discover your playwrights, and how do you make others, programmers, artistic directors, discover your playwrights, if we want to go further than just this accidental happening, someone sees something and wants to do with them?
Just go out and see them. I think it's that. So I, for example, when I have like a French playwright I work with now, and I know that she's developing a trilogy with Théâtre Colline, and one is going to happen then, and then at the Avignon Festival, and then later on. And she came here, I introduced her to some of the theatres here, she had meetings, and now I follow them up and they say she's interesting, can I read something? And then I let them know, this is what happens at Avignon Festival, she's included, go and see it. And I think it's mainly go out to the other countries and see the plays that you heard might be interesting. Go to the festivals, I think that, but I might not be right there, but I have a feeling that the festival scene in continental Europe is very vibrant, and all the countries go, and shows come from every country to these festivals, with the exception of UK productions. And there seems to, they don't really go out to the festivals, neither with productions nor really seeing them, I think.
Sorry.
Go on.
No, I mean, I was saying that in Fabulamundi is all very structured, because actually we work that each country has theatre partners, and each of them select 10 playwrights. So we trust the selection of the partners. So I know that I have to choose among that 10 playwrights from Germany or from France or from Spain. And so this is actually a lot of mediated by the partners. And so we have this selection which works till the 2020, and we have to work with those playwrights and not others, let's say. So this is actually our way of discovering them. And what we have done with Fabulamundi, we have a website in which we have listed all the playwrights, presented their work, and we have put online also the archive that we have on the text there, and all the translations that are done. So, I mean, this is a free access archive. So we are happening that we receive requests from many other countries which are not involved in Fabulamundi at all, because they want just to receive and read the text. For example, we receive requests from USA, from whatever. I mean, they was just, and then we send the text, because of course we want to disseminate them as much as we can. So for us, it's not really that we go and discover, but that we trust the theatre partner which is presenting the 10 playwrights. So that's how it works. But it's a project, so it's completely different from the work that she does.
I get recommendations from the German publishers, the agents, or I've seen something. And then I pass that on to people here, and then hopefully they trust. You need to get to learn the people who send you material, so you know what they like. And then they might tell you, I once had one who said, if you ever send me such a leftist communist shit again, I'm never going to open another email of you. And I say, okay, fine. So, you know, you start learning what people might want, and then they understand how you work.
But I just add to Eurodrum, because this is now mentioned so many times and I haven't really explained it, because Eurodrum is a grassroots organization that works in different language committees, which is a big difference to the other initiatives. Also, we see our aim more in the working with the translators, not so much with the theatres, so we're actually not staging stuff or organizing events. But what we do, and what is maybe a big difference, is that we do open calls, which means that every playwright or translator can send us their plays if they fit the criteria of the language committee. So this is not, it's a non-filtered process that people can come to us directly and send us their stuff, and we circulate it and evaluate it and hope to help, especially the translated stuff, to be staged more.
And it's also interesting, if you go to the website, you encounter texts in Russian or something in Russian, where, or at least other languages, where someone not writing in the big languages, German, English, also may find their
Yeah. It's actually one of the big focus is on the so-called smaller language groups, which means that we do not only work with French and German playwrights, but every language spoken in the European wider area should have a language committee. And this is not a national committee, so I am the coordinator of the German language committee, which doesn't mean the German committee, because I also represent playwrights writing in German from Italy or from Belgium or whatever. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask Sissi something, because we were talking about how plays travel and how do they travel from the continent to the UK. Did you find that when you've got the writer there, that there is a more likely interest from productions than when you've just got the text?
Do you mean when the writer is there,
when you're presenting a writer, because you said that you've had that you can present writers or you can present text.
I think I start with, well, yes, it does. It helps if a writer is here or comes and just has something exciting. I can go to artistic directors say, this writer is here, that's what they do, would you like to meet them? And then they start a conversation, and then I gauge of that. Are they going to be interested in that writer in the future to actually read plays? So that is one way. But there's equally good just sending a play when I tell them this is what they've been doing and that's why I think it's interesting or not, whatever. And then they come back and say, oh, interesting, can I read more? Or I can then tell them they might be coming. I would like to meet them. So I think it's the two things, but
I was just trying to gauge whether it's because maybe plays on the page written in Europe work a bit differently on the page than plays written in a kind of an English-British style, if you like, where it's much more structured. I'm generalizing, but do you know what I mean?
I think, but what I realize is that I send a lot to directors as opposed to producers. I do send to producers too, but the directors tend to see through that. And they then might say, I really love this, and they talk to the producers because they have because the producers invite them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a helpful medium.
So in a way, it's director-led here as well.
Well, and yes, that's why I think the working together of playwright and director is brilliant.
Well, before we open it up to some questions for the audience, I was just wondering, as you started, Ulrike, you said, well, actually in Germany, if we look really at the system, we have somehow a very similar problem that foreign plays don't really take place in our German theatre. So I was just wondering about the others as well. Have you encountered any other initiatives, ideas, mechanisms in your own countries or in an exchange between countries where you were involved in, say, I don't know, Italy and France and so on, that might be interesting for us to know and to consider in a way to foster this exchange?
I think as they were mentioning, I mean, basically the place where in Italy where you see contemporary dramaturgy is at festivals mostly. So there are some festivals which are dealing with contemporary playwriting, but and also Fabulamundi comes from another project that we started in 2007, which was Face à Face, which is just a project among Italy and France, and it was very interesting because it gave us, the idea of exchange as a first thing. So the traveling of the text and the traveling of the authors, and being staged by
the face to face.
Yes, by some others, and so that was it. But actually, I know some festivals mostly than initiatives which are globally international. I mean, for the Italian stage, I don't know in other countries.
Anything about?
Well, I think we're undergoing a kind of demographic change at the moment, right? So I think as challenging as it might be, it's sort of helping maybe to make the theatre scene in Europe a bit more open to cultures we haven't heard from before. Because like 10 years ago, you would hardly ever see African actors on a German stage. And now I'm not saying that it became normal, but it happens at least. And they start to get casted for, say, normal shows, not only to play the refugee on stage. And this is, I personally, because I work a lot in Asia, I'm very happy to see that, because I've been trying to build connections for years, and it's impossible to sell Chinese stuff to German state theatres. They just, they don't even read it. So I think, we do all live in our bubbles, and we all live in our intellectual bubbles, and that's another issue, but still I think the theatre world has become a bit more aware of the fact that culture doesn't end where Europe ends or something like that, and that's I hope that will grow in the future.
Even if in Europe we have also wider bubbles. I've noticed with Fabulamundi, for example, Italy, Spain are much more isolated from the northern countries. When we spoke with the Czech Republic Theatre, they have staged German, they have staged French, they have staged, all the northern countries, but they never considered the southern ones. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, even among European countries, which is really something, because some dramaturgy have not, for the international prestige of the others. So maybe that's also another thing to work on.
In Slovenia, I must say that because the language is spoken by so few, that lots of people who work in theatre, artistic directors, speak so many other languages and can read in other languages. So a lot of foreign plays are being put on, and quite a wide range from, Latvia and Finland to UK to Italy, Spain. So kind of quite a range of different writers from different countries. I still think it's kind of more Europe and US oriented than any other continents, but there is a lot of plays and translation being staged.
Thank you very much to our panelists, and please join me in thanking Claudia, Kim, Sissi and Ulrike for a very stimulating exchange, for fascinating ideas and further prompts for thoughts on the topic of this weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.